We continue to do the important work that Canadians expect us to do. We had a long, detailed meeting with Ambassador Greer and his colleagues. You may notice Madame Charette remains in the building to continue that work. Canadians expect us to get a deal that's in the economic interest of Canada and Canadian workers. We're very close. We continue to make progress, and we're going to stay here and do the work that's necessary until we get to that point.
That was Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc leaving a long meeting in Washington today. LeBlanc and Canada's top trade negotiator are working to finalize the details of a deal with the United States. Work that comes with a deadline, as 50% U.S. tariffs are set to come into effect tomorrow night. Meanwhile, here at home, mixed reaction from some of Canada's premiers to their call with the Prime Minister last night.
I was told by the Prime Minister that he wants us to put the booze back on the shelves. I wouldn't say that he was begging us, but what is a step before begging? What I would say to Canadians is leave it there. If we put the booze back on the shelves, don't buy it.
I would certainly not describe him as begging, but I would describe him as being committed to getting the best possible deal for our country and being honest about some of the parts that may be involved and the requirements of us.
If it's globally positive, it is possible that we put back the alcohol on the shelves of the SAQ, but we need first to have the analysis.
As part of this agreement, he asked all of the provinces, as a sign of good faith, would we put U.S. liquor back on our shelves, and we all agreed. The question of whether or not people will support it, that's the individual's choice, obviously.
The power panel is here. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister and a member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Committee on Canada-U.S. Economic Relations. Michelle Cadario was Deputy Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. And Shachi Kurl is president of the Angus Reid Institute. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to start with you, Michelle. Based on what little we know about this supposed deal, is it sounding like a win for Canada?
Well, listen, I have no doubt, and, I go back to what the Prime Minister said from the beginning. He has no interest in signing a deal that's bad for Canada. And he would rather have no deal than a bad deal. And so I think that they are doing all of the analysis, and now it's very deep into the detailed work, I'm sure, on every single product and every derivative of every product, to try and make sure that the Canadian jobs are protected, and having to do that very, very delicate balance across a whole lot of industries and a whole lot of interests, and trying to just keep, our own economic sovereignty and our economic future at hand. It's a very tough decision. I think we all know it's not going to be as good as it was, right? Mr. Trump has upended world order, and he is a man who is bound and determined for Americans to pay more for the goods that they consume. And his tariff policy, he feels like he doesn't care how that impacts Americans, and that's going to become a part of our lives going forward. And so, I think it's about minimizing risk, and again, just grinding and trying to make sure that we can do the best we can for the most people that we can.
Lisa, there's been a few little leaks, mostly of what seems to be on surface positive. The idea that sectoral tariffs would be coming down, auto sector tariffs are coming down. Whether it's enough or not, that's a separate argument or issue. But should the government be preparing Canadians for the kind of concessions that had to be made to get this deal, and should Canadians be bracing for that?
So I don't believe that anybody should be talking about the content of the deal until the deal is signed. I'm going to pick up on something that Michelle said, and I agree with her that the Prime Minister has said in the past that no deal is better than a bad deal for Canada. I would submit, though, that what changed the game significantly was the Section 338 tariff threat of 50% on a wide variety but highly impactful group of industries in this country that would have a serious impact on jobs almost instantaneously. Once those things were put in the window, I really think Canada had no choice but to try to figure out a way to prevent those from biting, but at the same time, work on some of those other sectoral tariffs that have been very disturbing for us here: steel, auto, aluminum. And I think that's what they're doing at the table right now. When they have concluded a final deal, then they'll come out and they'll brief everybody. I think the only reason why the premiers, quite frankly, have been brought into the fold is because one of the prerequisites to such a deal is booze back on the shelves, provincial procurement rules, including the United States, again, and having some leeway on dairy. That's why there's actually discussions around it. Otherwise, it would have been a signed deal and you would have been briefed on it after it was done.
Shachi, in terms of this no deal is better than a bad deal, if we do land a deal and Canadians finally get to see it, do you think they're prepared to see the deal as something that held to that principle, or do you think that Canadians are worried that that principle no longer holds?
Karina, it so depends on what's in the deal. And let's be really, really clear. No one actually knows what's in the deal. Nobody knows the fine print right now. I think one of the biggest signals that maybe we're not talking about as much today is, yes, there's been a lot of attention on alcohol. That is filling the information vacuum that Peter Armstrong is so frustrated about and banging his fist on the table about. But, when it comes from a public opinion standpoint, only about 10% of Canadians say that they would definitely go back to buying U.S. alcohol. I suspect that number may be a little bit higher once the stuff is back on the shelves. A lot of people looking forward to making an old-fashioned with Maker's Mark again. But at the same time, things started to go a little sideways last night. Dominic LeBlanc was not supposed to be in D.C. today. Marc-Andre Blanchard was not supposed to be in D.C. today. He had dinner plans in Ottawa that were canceled. So we're having conversations about a deal is done, a deal is imminent, it's not a deal until the Sharpie has touched the agreement, has touched the paper. And even then, there's very little trust actually among Canadians that any deal reached will actually hold because of the volatility of what's going on in the White House. But if you look at the last 12 hours, some of the untold story here is the fact that, we saw the Truth Social post. The president went to bed a couple nights ago, and Howard Lutnick went to work, and he's got people that he answers to in the donor universe, in the Republican universe, and the lobbyist universe. So this thing isn't glued, this shoelace isn't tied until it's tied with a double knot. And until that point, it's really hard to figure out where Canadians are going to land on whether they think it was a good deal or a bad deal. I think there is a level of cover. There is a level of cover. The data tells us that among Canadians, that they are prepared to give the Prime Minister on holding fast and firm. But of course, that's all predicated, as Lisa just mentioned, on the fact that we have not, as a country, started to feel the most hurtful effects of how bad this could be. And I've said on this program many times, I hope we don't get there. So it's a little bit like asking people to weigh in on air. We don't know what the thing is that people are being asked to judge yet.
Michelle, in terms of the briefings yesterday, there was also, obviously, before he even met with the premiers, the Prime Minister met with his cabinet. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what might have been his approach to getting a cabinet who have regional, not just ministerial overview. They come from certain regions. In terms of a deal that will probably have some give and take that will benefit some places and not benefit other places. How do you prepare your cabinet for that?
Well, I think that he likely went over the broad outlines of the deal. And as Shashi said, they're literally still there today trying to figure it out. And everything matters in the details. And I'm sure that he went through some of the trade-offs and some of the considerations that they had to do. And I would hope that once it is a deal, once it is signed, presuming that it will be, that the Prime Minister will have the license to then be able to go out and to communicate those very trade-offs and some of the contemplation that was going into it, some of his concerns, why he might have had to agree to something that Canadians aren't too excited about. And otherwise why they might think that certain things are unfair or they just don't understand. Like, I think it's going to be it's going to be incumbent on him not just to do another video, but to really get out there and to talk to Canadians, and just be as transparent as he can about what this now is and what the future now looks like and what that means for Canadians, for Canadian industries, for Canadian jobs, and what the government is going to do to try and prop up those who maybe weren't so lucky and they were part of the trade-offs. And so I think that that's probably also something that he has cabinet and some of the key ministers working on, as well as, there were these trade-offs. And so, there might be these gaps, and we need to be able to be there for Canadians.
Lisa, I'm just going to the premiers. We had quite a range of reactions. I will note we've had quite a bit of silence for one particular premier, and that would be Doug Ford from Ontario. But the ones we have heard from, quite a range. What did you make of what you heard today from the premiers?
I watched very carefully. It started last night. So the first premier out was Scott Moe, and he was positive and he made the right noises. Next came Tim Houston, who told us in his interview that the Prime Minister had asked that the booze go back on the shelves. And then from there, it all kind of unraveled, I would say, because Madame Frechette came out and said only Quebec's going to make the decision. And Mr. Eby said what he said. And then we had Wab Kinew, who came out and had I would say, very fulsome press conference today. Now, here's the thing with all of these interventions. We were told on the Advisory Council, and I can tell you this, that the United States is watching very carefully the commentary in the media being made by Canadians, not just regular Canadians, but politicians as well. Any word that's been uttered in the last 24 to 48 hours is going to be poured over and scrutinized by the U.S. and by the trade teams who are negotiating. Anything that we say here that could harm the negotiations, I think, is not a necessarily good thing, quite frankly. And I wish that Mr. Kinew hadn't said the things that he said, because I'm sure it caused some problems for our negotiators at the table, at the very least explaining what the heck he was talking about. So, it's one thing to tell the premiers and brief them up. It's another thing for them to want to come out and utilize the moment in order to put forth their own narratives when, as Shachi said, there's no double knot on this deal yet, and we have no guarantee that those Section 338 tariffs are not going to appear Friday night at midnight.
Shachi, what did you make of the range of reactions we've had from the premiers?
I think it's an interesting precursor, harbinger to some of the reactions we may see when we start figuring out who the winners and losers are going to be sectorally. And I think we can make some guesses, some speculative guesses. I'm talking to you in BC, where no one is really expecting, softwood to escape the pain. But let's be really clear, when we talk about sectoral winners and losers, we're actually talking about regional winners and losers. So if there is an opening up of dairy markets for consumers, how does that play into a Quebec provincial election? You heard or saw David Eby's post yesterday on social media talking about how he was taking a Team Canada approach. Around the alcohol, I was struck by sort of the part that wasn't said, the second paragraph, which will be, and Michelle mentioned it, what kind of bailouts and supports are you going to be providing to the provinces that house the sectors that are hardest hit and who will feel the pain far worse than others? So, I feel like we were talking about this a year ago, where, the premiers were all like, we're all in this together. But really, do you get to a point where we see who's okay and who's not okay? And it's a little bit of sauve qui peut, like, hey, where's the help for me? Where are the opportunities for my province to ride this out because your province is doing okay out of this?
Michelle, what do you make of the fact that we haven't heard from Doug Ford yet today?
I think that above all, Doug Ford wants to be Team Canada. He understands how important it is that we are speaking with a somewhat united voice, or at least not out there and actually disagreeing with the Prime Minister at this very precarious time. And so I suspect that, you know, maybe he's just choosing his time and place to be as to when he's going to be able to come in. You know, he has been Team Canada all along. There's always been some disagreements, and he's certainly been vocal. But he knows how many jobs are at stake. He knows the impact that no deal, the 338s that we've been talking about, would have on our economy here in Canada. And I think that in the end, Doug Ford will be that Team Canada player.
So it's sort of a question of if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Lisa, really quickly to you, you know, a lot of people talking about this laying the groundwork for finally getting on with CUSMA talks. Do we have any leverage left for those talks to become something meaningful?
Sure, because CUSMA is an act of Congress, and in order to make amendments in CUSMA, the United States is going to make some asks of us, and we have the power to say yes or no with respect to that deal. So yes, you can definitely go into a process of taking a look at CUSMA. I think the best, I would say, strategy on CUSMA is running the ball, quite frankly, is putting it into a process and taking a very long time to go through all of the demands that the United States are making in terms of what they want to change. I mean, that's how I'd approach it.
Thanks very much, all of you, for your insights today. That's the Power Panel.